And as KXCL Live and Local continues in this 8 o'clock hour on a Friday, a conversation we recorded by phone yesterday afternoon with a return guest to the program. He is the Executive Director of Consumers Research. His name is Will Hild. You find them online at consumersresearch.org. Mr. Hild, thanks so much for the time.
It's so great to be with you.
Remind people who have not heard our past conversations, Consumers Research, who are you folks and what do you do?
Certainly. Well, we're the nation's oldest protection organization, founded in 1929. We have an over 90-year pedigree of standing up for the consumer in the marketplace and amplifying his voice. And over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been really focusing on the harms that woke capitalism and ESG has on the quality of goods and services that are available to consumers at reasonable prices.
You wrote a very interesting op-ed for Daily Caller. The headline, Americans Pay a Price as Global Insurance Company Pushes Liberal Activism. We're talking here about the Chubb Insurance Group. And I guess, first of all, I'd ask in a broader sense, how is it that so many of these companies went so far wrong with this political wokeism?
Well, it's a bit of a complicated answer, but to tell you the truth, a lot of it has to do with decisions that corporations made to become political utilities for the far left wing of the Democratic Party in return for government favors, instead of focusing on serving their customers and their consumers and making money and success that way. And one of the things that we found is to the extent that companies are treating their companies are going woke, they tend to be treating their consumers worse. And those things tend to be correlated, and why we think it's such a threat to consumer protection.
Now, obviously, many of these companies have expanded, they've diversified, they've gotten into the global marketplace. Is that part of it, that they're just trying to curry favor, or is it all about idealism as opposed to profits, which, as I recall, companies owe a fiduciary duty to shareholders to maximize?
That's exactly right. And certainly there are companies that need to diversify across national boundaries. What's alarming is when you see those investments start to, say, the tail wagging the dog. One of the things we saw with Chubb is that their CEO, Evan Greenberg, basically told America that we needed to tone down the rhetoric as it pertained to defending the integrity of the nation of Taiwan. Now, what's interesting about that is Chubb has poured billions of dollars of their assets under management, the money that they keep on hand to ostensibly pay out the, awards when something, that they're insuring occurs. They invest that money globally, and they poured billions of dollars into companies in mainland China. So the question is why is Evan Greenberg weighing in on issues of geopolitical decisions that the United States is making, especially, undercutting our positions in maintaining their security? Well, it would appear that it's because he is currying favor with the Chinese Communist Party, who obviously can put those investments at threat. And so that's one of the questions we're asking when these companies go woke is, what's the motivation here? Is it really about making money, which they claim all this woke nonsense is? Or is it really because you've now tied yourself to a foreign adversary and they have leverage over you, and they're using that leverage?
Obviously, an individual leading a company can chart whatever course they want, but they are responsible to their board of directors, their shareholders, consumers, etc. Was this publicly disclosed to where, if I'm somebody who is getting my insurance coverage through Chubb or one of its subsidiaries, and that alone makes it difficult for me to track it, right, as a consumer. But if I don't like it, can I just, is it well enough known so I could take my business and walk?
Well, certainly. I think it's one of the really interesting things. You noted that these companies can certainly, we believe in their freedom to do as they please, generally speaking. But when they've been engaging in this ESG stuff, this woke capitalism stuff, getting involved in things like DEI, meaning racial discrimination against whites and Asians and males, they've claimed that the reason that they're doing it is to make more money. And they've argued that, net zero targets and, again, DEI or getting involved with groups like BLM was just because it was good business. It was going to endear them to the nation and customers. What's interesting is when we've hit these companies and amplified what they're doing and the ways in which that undercuts consumer interest, they are quickly scrubbing the websites where they brag about these things. Well, if I was to run ads that said, Toyota has the best cars, I don't think they would be scrubbing their websites or hiding from that, right? That is a advantage to them if you're complimenting someone's product. So if these things are really supposed to be competitive edges, right? If the farther you go with diversity, i.e. discriminate against whites and Asians and males, if those are really supposed to be good things, both for your internal team and, for your relationship with your customer base, then why is it that they hide it every time we bring up these types of things? And I think the case is that it's not because they're not doing these things because they really are about serving their customers or finding better talent. They are engaging in misusing a corporation that they have been stewards of. I mean, they're executives at the corporation. They don't own it. That's the shareholders. They are engaging in misusing that. And when you call them out for that, they're ashamed and worried that the consequences are going to come down on them. And that's to be clear, I'm not accusing someone of in the legal sense of embezzlement, but in my opinion, misusing a corporation to just favor your own political aspirations or party or views is a form of embezzlement. You have misused you have misused corporate assets. You've misused their goodwill, their brand perception with the public to simply enrich your own view of the world. And it's funny, like I said, when we call them out for that, they get very shy about it. And that's been the case with Chubb. They've walked back a number of the things that they've been doing. They've started hiding a lot of things, but the facts are there. I mean, Evan Greenberg, for example, came out and said that being able to ban men from entering women's restrooms was a quote-unquote threat to democracy, and that Chubb was going to oppose that, which is insane.
Will Hild is the executive director of Consumers Research. It's the nation's oldest consumer protection organization, and you find them online at consumersresearch.org. He joins us on News Talk 1540 KXEL. And again, his piece on this topic, op-ed piece at Daily Caller. Now, if you are a publicly traded stock company, there's a fiduciary duty, we mentioned this before, to the shareholders, and that is to maximize revenue unless the shareholders are fine with you taking on certain policies that actually harm the bottom line. But again, they have to know about it. And it used to be at some of these shareholder meetings, somebody would buy the minimum amount of shares of stock and get up and blow the whistle during the public comment section. That sort of went away, as I understand it, with COVID because everybody was able to hide in their basement. And I just don't know if there's this sort of public groundswell and reaction that there used to be when we had these sorts of meetings. And obviously you folks are doing tremendous work in exposing it, but I'm just wondering how broad-based among shareholders or those who actually have a good vote, if you will, how broadly based is that?
That's a great question. I'm glad you bring up that point because while there were politically tinged proposals and questions that came up in the shareholder meeting, it was done publicly. And even if someone just bought shares just to be able to raise an issue like PETA or an environmental group, at least the other shareholders had the opportunity to see the conversations that were engaged between that activist and management. One of the reasons you asked me, earlier, why we see so much of this, one of the reasons for that is because increasingly there's a political agenda driven by large asset managers like BlackRock. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard about that company. Mm-hmm. What they may not know is that BlackRock, not because they themselves are wealthy, but because they invest so many of other people's money, state, local pension funds, university endowments, even the federal pension fund is invested by them. They end up holding a large sum of shares from a lot of these companies. And they engage these companies directly with something they call corporate engagements, where these are phone calls, Zoom meetings, face-to-face meetings, where they go in and they express their views with management behind closed doors in ways that you or I have no visibility into. In fact, the only reason we know about it is because BlackRock, up until recently, bragged about doing it. And those conversations where you have minority shareholders, and I put shareholders in quotes there because, again, it's not BlackRock's money, it's you and I money, it's our state's money, it's our federal government and federal workers and military's money. They're using that to push a political agenda behind closed doors. And I think that is a problem, too. That's not the only reason that companies like Chubb are going woke. I think the problem there is the management himself doesn't really serve the fiduciary duty and is not really serving his customers. But that is a big part of why you've seen so many corporations across the country go in that direction, even when it's ticking off their customers. And we've obviously seen that with situations like Target or Budweiser or more recently Cracker Barrel. And you go, why do all these corporations seem so dead set in poking their own customers in the eye and ticking them off? Well, the reason for that is they answer more to Larry Fink at BlackRock than they do to you or I. I know that sounds crazy, but they have to worry more about Larry Fink replacing them or members of their boards of directors than they have to worry about you or I crashing their sales numbers. Now, that's turning around, just to be clear. I don't want to give consumers the impression that they shouldn't feel empowered. They absolutely should. And the cases I gave, Target, Budweiser, Cracker Barrel, are perfect examples of where consumers and customers have risen up and said, enough, we're not taking this anymore, and they have reversed course. So consumers should absolutely feel empowered. This is something that they got away with for a long time, but they're getting away with it less and less anymore. And that's part of the reason we raised the alarm on Chubb, because it's an insurance company most people have probably never heard of, and they may not know unless it's just their property insurer or something like that this company is being used to push a far left-wing agenda without anyone's buy-in.
And to make it even worse, it would be one thing if Chubb, and I'm citing Chubb because you did in the article. I don't have any axe to grind. I've never been a policyholder, et cetera. So I don't have any motive here with regard to Chubb other than these facts. At the same time, they're doing everything you just told us about. They're not taking care of those who have insurance. When they're and I understand insurance is a tough business. You have a catastrophic weather event that throws off the calculation for amortization and payment of claims, etc. But Chubb seems to have this habit of denying coverage or canceling coverage at the very time property owners need it most. And so it's not just that they're woke, they're not even taking care of serving their customers.
That's exactly right. And like I said, this has really become a hallmark of woke companies. When you dig into them, you see a company going super woke or grandstanding or virtue signaling on a super far left issue. One of the things we almost always find is they're either mistreating their customers directly or they're committing misdeeds in the market. And we've seen this. We've been going after and doing consumer education campaigns, high dollar ad campaigns against corporations now since 2021. So we've probably targeted 25 different companies. And without fail, when we see a company going super woke, we look into it, and sure enough, they are getting rated worse and worse by their customer base. People are abandoning them. Their sales are decreasing, or they're just being abusive. And that's certainly what we found with some of the activities of Chubb, denying claims that seem, very meritorious. There was stuff going on in California where people's homes that weren't completely burned, but that were damaged in the fire, they were trying to basically short thrift them on the repairs, or at least that's the claim so far. And so this is not surprising to us, because a lot of what wokeness serves as for these corporations sometimes is a way to distract from the things that they are doing wrong. And the New York Times and Washington Post will write glowing pieces about how your CEO is taking a stand on some far left political issue, and it'll distract, or they won't cover the things that are doing to undermine your customer base. Is one of the things we found. One of the first companies we went after was American Airlines. Then CEO Doug Parker had used that company to go after the election integrity legislation going through in the state of Texas, which is ironic because you need an ID, obviously, to use their product. But one of the things we found when we looked into them is that they had been declining in the quality of that airline for numerous years. And the Wall Street Journal had rated them the worst airline in America multiple times. They lost the most bags. They kicked the most people off of flights involuntarily. And they had just taken a $4.5 billion bailout from courtesy of you and me, the taxpayer, and then immediately turned around and taken a political stand against the majority of Texans and basically called them, racist, Jim Crow 2.0. And so the wokeness, one of the things I try to get through to people is the wokeness and the mistreatment of customers are connected. It's not a coincidence. It's the ESG and woke capitalism is the refuge of charlatans. And when you don't know how to actually run your airline or run your insurance company to the benefit of your customers and your shareholders, you go to this woke nonsense. And so consumers should be very weary of companies that are virtue signaling or crowing about how, woke they are, because what it probably means is they don't know how to do the basics. They're not going to be able to serve your needs.
And one thing about when you and others shine the light on these sorts of things. They then, as you say, scrub the website. But that doesn't mean they've changed their policies. It just makes it harder to detect. And so we don't want people to be lulled into a false sense of security by saying, oh, well, there, they took it all down. They don't do that anymore. We've talked to a lot of people on this program who have done investigations where it's no longer on the website, but they're still doing it. Or it's not called that name, but they're still doing it. So you don't take the victories quickly, do you?
That's exactly right, and that is such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up because, in some ways this is a very easy problem to point out the last 4 or 5 years because the companies were bragging about it to their left-wing overlords. Well, since we've been raising the alarm and spreading the news to the average consumer who don't like this kind of nonsense, they start to try and hide it, but that doesn't mean they're changing the activities. And in fact, you mentioned renaming it. We did a woke alert, which is our text message-based subscription system for those who want to become activists against woke capitalism, woke corporatism. You can find that on our website, by the way, at consumersresearch.org. We did a woke alert earlier this year on companies that were changing the name of their DEI department to simply the Department of Belonging. But they weren't changing anything else. Not even the stock photos on the webpage were changing. So it's clear that they were not changing the anti-white and anti-Asian discriminatory practices, anti-male discriminatory practices that are encompassed inherently in DEI. But what's funny is we covered like 4 or 5 companies that were doing this. And one of them, Nationwide Insurance, was so upset about this, they called and threatened me. They had Libby Locke, the famous defamation attorney who sued Fox News over the Dominion voting machines, and is now, I think, suing Candace Owens on behalf of Bridget McCrone. They had her call and threaten us if we didn't basically retract our statements against them. Now, I don't make false statements about corporations, so I don't have to worry about defamation claims. So sending some bulldog attorney isn't going to change much about our behavior. And in fact, we looked farther into Nationwide and found out that the discrimination in their activities was far, far worse than anything we'd covered in the woke alert. So we did an entire campaign, notonourside.com if you want to see that, about all the many ways that Nationwide is engaging in discriminatory practices. And in fact, subsidizing the transing of kids through their Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio. My point being that these companies react very aggressively in order to cover their tracks because they don't want people to know what they're doing anymore. But that doesn't mean that they're changing their behaviors. And so we're going to have to really dig in. I always joke with my staff, listen, our last easy day was yesterday because they are going to start hiding more and more of their discriminatory practices in corporate America and in stuff that they're engaged in. So we're going to have to get better at investigating them. And, like I said, if people have situations, whistleblower situations where they're seeing racial and sex-based discrimination occurring in the name of DEI or at all, please visit us at the website. There's a place there you can send us messages. We'd love to know about it because, like you said, we're going to have to get good at uncovering not just they're not going to be bragging about it as much as they used to. So we're going to have to get good at uncovering the behavior and punishing it that way.
Notonourside.com. Well played, sir. If you go to consumersresearch.org, great website with all this information. Yes, you can sign up for the woke alerts. Yes, you can report things. There's also a nice subtle donate button as you think about year-end financial planning, and they would appreciate it. Mr. Hild, thanks so much for your work, first of all, and for the extended time today. And I don't think I have to tell you to keep it up because it seems to be a passion, and it's certainly necessary.
Well, thank you so much for having me and your attention on these issues. It's people like you bringing attention that's going to end this, and we really appreciate the work that your station has done and you as a host in uncovering this kind of thing.
Come back anytime, sir. Will Hild is the Executive Director of Consumers Research. They are the nation's oldest consumer protection organization. He's been in charge of the group for 5 years already. Consumersresearch.org. That's consumersresearch.org. And he joined us on the Newsline yesterday afternoon so you could hear the conversation now in this 8 o'clock hour of KXEL Live and Local from News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk, in the Cedar Valley at FM 100.5 and everywhere at AM 1540 and KXEL.com.